Sanjali Bhakti Leelaya. Pranams to one and all present here, both students and faculty members, professors and heads of various centers and departments. We are here today gathered for the celebration of Shankaracarya and National Philosopher's Day. Government of India has 5 years ago, Department of Cultural Center for Ministry of Culture, they decided that Vaishakha Shuddha Panchami, that is the Jayanti of both Shankaracarya and Acharya Ramanuja, that day should be celebrated as National Philosopher's Day. And as we all know, NEP 2020 emphasizes on integration of IKS. That means the younger generation must be aware of the cultural roots, philosophical roots of this country. So in that way, celebration of National Philosopher's Day gathers more importance. And ICPR, Indian Council for Philosophical Research, is providing grants for that. This year, with the help of our authorities, we were able to gather some fund, and we thought an eminent personality should be invited here to enlighten both our faculty community and student community. Fortunately, we got Professor Shonaleeka Kaul. So we are gathered for that purpose today now here. At the outset, to ward off all the Vigna or hurdles, I request our research assistant, Mr. Anirudh Sharma, to perform Laukika Mangala.
Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracarya Madhyamam Smadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Viditakhila Shastra Sudha Jaladhe Mahitopanishad Kathitartha Nidhe Hridaye Kalaye Vimalam Charanam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Karuna Varunalaya Palaya Mam Bhavasagara Dukha Vidhuna Hridam Rachaya Khila Darshana Tattva Vidam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Bhavata Janata Suhita Bhavita Nijabodha Vicharana Charumate Kalayeshwara Jeva Vivekavidam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Bhava Eva Bhavaniti Me Nitaram Samajayata Chetasi Kautukita Mama Varaya Moha Mahajaladim Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Sukrute Dhikrite Bahudha Bhavato Bhavita Samadarshana Lalasata Atidinamimam Paripalayamam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Jagati Mavitum Kalita Kritayo Vicharanti Mahamahasaschalatah Ahimam Shurivatra Vibhasi Guru Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Guru Pungava Pungava Ketanate Samatamayatam Nahi Kopi Sudhi Sharanagata Vatsala Tattvanidhe Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Viditanamaya Vishadaika Kalana Chakinchana Kanchanamasti Guru Dhrutameva Videhi Kripam Sahajam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam Bhava Shankara Deshikame Sharanam.
Thank you, Anirudh, for that wonderful rendition of one of the stotras of Acharya Shankara himself. Now, there is a Shastra Vakya, Agate Swagatam Kuryat. When we invite guests, there should be an official Swagata for them. I request Director, Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, Dr. Vinay Chandra Banavati sir, to formally welcome everyone and to set up the context for today's special lecture.
Sabhaye Namaha, Sabhasadbhyo Namaha. It's indeed a pleasure that we are able to organize this event today. In fact, we initially had a conversation somewhere in the month of April, and since then we wanted all the students to be here before we organize this event, and on this good day we are able to organize. So I extend a very hearty welcome to our chief guest of the day, Professor Shonaleeka Kaul ji, and to all our faculty members and dear students. We have been thinking why we need to organize events like this. One of the things that comes to our mind in our discussions, deliberations is this. Understanding any culture, any country in itself is a very complex process. If you have to look at the past, it's even more checkered, even more complex. Right? Complexity only increases with the extension of time. And given a country like India, it is even more challenging with the diversity that we have, with the kind of variety that we have, the richness, the opulence. I mean, you look into any dimension, wherever you put your hands, you get your hands full. That's the kind of country this is. So on one side, the complexity is enormous. But on the other side, fortunately, there is also a living tradition. Only a couple of culture civilizations can claim such a thing, and one of them is India. And how do we understand the past? How do we understand the culture? How do we make sense of the present looking at the past? Why are we even looking at the past? It's only to make a better sense of the present, right? So in that manner, what do we have? What are those threads anchoring which we can walk back, have a broader vision of this society and culture? One of the threads, strong threads that we have is people, the illustrious sons and daughters of this country who have been born across the length and breadth of the country over different phases of time. And one such personality is Adi Shankaracharya. In fact, it won't be an exaggeration if I say, if our youngsters are not familiar with Shankaracharya, with the works of Shankaracharya, then there is no way they can comprehend India at all. India is Shankara, Shankara is India in many ways. India has this ability to enter anything at a cognitive level, at an intellectual level with the best precision that is possible. So that is at the cognitive level. At the social level, it can also have a fabric which can be as accommodative as possible. And this is exactly what you can see in the works of Shankara. When you look into his philosophy, that is the heights where philosophy has reached a sublime state. But on the other side, if you look into his own Bhakti Sadhitya, if you look into the way he has reconciled the Pancha Matas that were present at that time, take any field, he is one of the greatest Samanvaya Acharyas that India has ever come across. So this is Acharya Shankara, and understanding India is only possible through understanding philosophy, the people and the practices that are prevalent. And one of the towering such personalities is Shankaracharya. And therefore, in order to understand them, understand their contribution, if we are today the way we are, I think we owe it to Acharya Shankara, like many other Acharyas. So therefore, when we thought it's a good opportunity to understand Shankara, then as Professor Naveen Bhatt said, we reached out to Professor Shonaleeka Kaul, and she was happy to agree and be here with us today. In fact, she is also a kind of personality who doesn't need any introduction given the kind of work that she has contributed. She is one of the internationally renowned cultural and intellectual historians, originating from India but well known across the world. She has contributed enormously to various history-related encyclopedias which have been published either by Cambridge University Press and many such esteemed publications. She is currently a full professor at Center for Historical Studies at JNU, and she's also a distinguished faculty or a visiting professor at various universities across the globe, including Yale University, Leiden University, and she's also a visiting professor at South Asia Institute in Heidelberg, one of the prestigious universities where good amount, both quality and quantities work that is happening abroad. It is Sai in Heidelberg University, and she's a visiting professor there. She has written at least 9 books, especially focusing on early history of South Asia, and her works on Kashmir especially, perhaps is a place where she also comes from originally. Her family comes from originally. Her work on Rajatarangini, which is one of the earliest historical texts, is considered to be one of the magnum opus that she has written. And her focus has been to try to present these ancient texts in a light that we can connect easily and understand ourselves much better. While there have been many atrocities committed on these texts by people who are not familiar with the tradition, with the culture, there are only few voices which can bring about that clarity, and she is one among them. And we are very happy to have you, ma'am, here today. Thank you for accepting and coming here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very warm first invitation and now introduction. It is a great pleasure to be here and to see this room full of so much energy, so many young people hopefully keen to learn about India and on India's own terms. I think that's very important, and that is something perhaps that Vinayji was referring to has been perhaps missing from the kind of histories we have been writing and teaching our students. In fact, we have all been students of the same system. So we have been trained and we have grown up in a sense with a particular way of looking at the Indic past, and that way may not always have included Indic visions, Indic voices, which is to say the sources and the texts themselves, and the skills to understand those texts, as I said, on their own terms. How do you do that if you don't know the tradition itself, right? We can, of course, bring modern global concepts to bear on ancient Indic texts to better elucidate them, to make for a more creative engagement with the past. That's not a problem at all, so long as it remains authentic and fair to the traditions being studied. Now that's just, I couldn't resist hearing your comments. That's just a few methodological comments as a preface to the talk, but more generally also. Ancient Indian history and Sanskrit literature in particular are a passion with me. They're not just my profession, and therefore I can't resist expressing thoughts about it whenever there is an occasion. But let me come back to today's talk and say that it is a great honor to speak today on the occasion of National Philosophers' Day. And who else but Adi Shankaracarya can we speak of when we talk of philosophy? What I will do today is discuss Shankara and his exegesis of Advait. What Advait is, if you don't already know, I will of course be telling you very broadly. Monist metaphysics. What that means, again, I'll be telling you. But what am I really talking about in today's talk? It's not merely Shankara's philosophy, but I will be bringing that into relationship with, into correlation with something that is central to the collective self-definition of India, and at least in pre-modern times. So central to the collective self-definition of a nation. Now this is a relevant exercise not only because Shankara's peregrinations, his journeys, have you heard about those? His Digvijaya, what are called his Digvijayas around the country. So not only because his Digvijayas have a direct bearing on this question, but also because the very idea of India in antiquity has come to be mistakenly confused and contested and challenged in recent times. I think you must be familiar. Every few years this debate will burst on the scene. You'll have entire media and social media covered with all kinds of voices suggesting that there never was an India before the British, and we owe our existence as a country, as a nation, as a people to some of the changes that British rule brought. I say that is very ironical for a nation that is 5,000 years old to be told that, you were put together by somebody from outside just a couple of centuries ago. And more than that, it's not just ironical, it's simply untrue. It's unhistorical. So we will talk a little bit about that, and then I will connect that with Shankara and hopefully do it in a way that also sheds some light on Shankara's philosophy itself. So metaphysics as metaphor, that will be our guiding thread for my argument today. We'll look at data, we'll look at evidence, and then we'll correlate it to put forth an argument. Now, as I said, this idea, the very fact that was there in India in ancient times, has come to be so confused and contested today that, some scholars and even lay people, frankly, they believe that a country as vast and heterogeneous as India could never have been considered one in the past. And that all attempts since 1947 to forge a unified Indian nation were nothing more than a precarious statist project. So, in other words, the idea of India as a unity is nothing more than a state trying to assert that unity, instead of realizing that there's actually a very long and rich history to the people and the land. What I will do today is, looking at Shankara's philosophy and his Digvijaya actually helps us re-examine this very myopic perspective on the formation of national identities. Reasserting the ancient past in such discourses in a historically grounded fashion. So not rhetoric alone, but actually looking at the evidence very closely. By doing that, I locate Shankara's metaphysics in an understanding of the many processes and continuities that mapped a nation called India. Thus, history and metaphysics will be brought together in conversation via the intersection of metaphor, as I will explain. For those who may not know, Adi Shankaracharya, Adi means the first. So Adi Shankaracharya was there is debate about his dates, I will talk about that later, but let us go with a 7th or 8th century Advaitin par excellence, a Vedantin Advaitin, exegete and teacher par excellence, who is regarded by many as actually the most authoritative Hindu thinker of all time. Although I do believe that so much of Shankara's philosophy is actually trans-sectarian. It's about transcending, and consciousness is about precisely that. So sometimes to bracket and reduce thinkers of this magnitude to one religion or another betrays a lack of understanding of both the religion and the thinker. But anyhow, that is how he is usually understood. However, it has also been assumed by some thinkers, both Western and Indian, that the prodigiousness of his very short life, he is supposed to have passed at 32 years of age only, and yet in that very young life, he is believed to have composed so many and such prodigious texts and thoughts and songs and theories that scholars suggest that this is simply beyond credence, that you can't believe it. In other words, they cast a certain doubt over the intellectual and spiritual accomplishments and even the existence of Adi Shankara. Scholarship tends to confound that issue and raise questions about it. So they believe that he is less a figure perhaps of history than of hagiography and legend. We are asked to speak of him in these terms. Now, as you will see today, I think there is enough in the biography of Shankara and his work to suggest that his role belongs as much in history as it does in any other field. And so to cast him aside as something, the slippery slope of hagiography or legend or myth and not history is perhaps an all too convenient way of dismissing a personality who has actually played a great role in so many ways in Indic history. So, according to some such scholars who actually are doubtful about whether there was a Shankara, was there one Shankara, was there a historical Shankara and then other mythical Shankaras, etc., etc. According to them, even his Digvijayas possibly did not happen. That these are just apocryphal. That means these are just stories, these are just legends. And how could someone as far back as 8th century have actually traversed on foot the entire extent of such a vast nation, etc., etc. The arguments keep going on and on. But the broad thrust of it is that a general suspicion has been generated by certain scholarship about the authenticity of both the man and the phenomenon of his Digvijayas. Now, I put to you that such a position tends towards a somewhat hyper-historicized scrutiny and a rush to what is called nullification by verification. Now, there is a lot of things about our past that may or may not surrender to verification, that may or may not surrender to material corroboration. That doesn't mean they didn't happen, or that certainly doesn't mean that they hold an incredible significance for Indic civilization. What should a historian do with that significance? Should we dismiss it? Because there's no archaeology, for example, for a certain phenomenon, does that mean it never happened? Is the absence of evidence of absence? Lots and lots of research questions actually can arise from any chapter of ancient Indic history that we pick up. We'll try and steer clear of such approaches to Shankara that tend essentially to do a nullification by verification. Because remember that whatever we say, he continues to be, and whatever the factual specificities, I am not taking sides in terms of this date or that location he went to. Whatever the facts, it is equally true that a figure of his seminality in Indic philosophy and history has to be historicized. You can't dismiss him. What such an approach, the scholarship that I was talking about, what it may lose sight of is that even if his Digvijaya to far-flung parts of what was India is apocryphal, the strong local memories of this journey are not. They are historical. And I think you're all familiar with what I'm talking about. Be it modern Srinagar, or Badrinath, Puri, Dwarka, Kedarnath, Kanchi, Kaladi, his birthplace, Sringeri, and I can go on and on. At all of these places, there is still alive, so many centuries later, a very strong local memory. Shankara is remembered and memorialized even in concrete built form like mathas and temples at most of these places. This lends what I call a materiality to the Digvijayas. A materiality, do you understand? This is not simply something that's constructed, it's not something that's fabricated and an idea that's been floating around for over a millennia. You actually have a concrete existence on the ground at multiple places across the country of a local memory of a Shankaracarya. So again, you can't dismiss it. You have to face it and see what are the implications of it. These local memories deserve to be taken seriously and to be historicized. Exploring the imaginative rationale of these traditions may yield significant clues as to the conceptual spatial universe that they both inhabited and enacted. I'll repeat that for you. Conceptual, spatial relating to spaces, right? To the idea of India, that's what I'm hinting to. And which such traditions both enacted. They're actually bringing about such concepts, and they also inhabited. They were living such concepts. All this will get clear by the time I'm done with the talk. But let's go back a little bit, historiographically. In the year 1880, Sir John Strachey, British administrator and educator, who trained the then Imperial Civil Services of India, so this is obviously well before independence, would begin his lectures to the civil servants on an introduction to India with the following infamous words, quote, "The first and most important thing about India to learn is that there is not and never was an India. Unquote. 1880. Where are we now? 2024. And a lot of us are still believing this, merrily oblivious to history. Now, coming from a representative of the colonial states then, whose political conquest of the land had indeed been piece by piece, this divisive statement, uninformed by historical thought, should perhaps not surprise. What is surprising, however, is that nearly a century and a half later, there is still epistemic confusion over the question of how far back India as a territorial entity and unity goes. And it is not uncommon to find some leading scholars deny even the possibility of an India in pre-modern times. So they don't just say it wasn't in existence, they also say it could not have been in existence. So you have no hope or chance with such a belief system. What are the examples? Very quickly. And I'm going to go over this part a little more quickly and read out so that we can focus on what is really of essence. So, in his authoritative book, India After Gandhi, Ramachandra Guha called India, quote, an unnatural nation, implying that it was modern developments such as British rule and the freedom movement that forced a diverse and disconnected bunch of regions and peoples to somehow come together in one artificial and unhistorical entity called the Indian nation. Others like Partha Chatterjee declared that, and I'm going to read this out, quote, there are no ancient nations anywhere in the world. All nations, and he uses the word Rashtra, are modern. The Indian Rashtra as a nation state has only been in existence since the middle of the 20th century, unquote. Now, a very quick comment on this. Ironically, the word Rashtra that he is saying for nation or nation state, the Sanskrit word, actually is a very ancient term. You find it right in later Vedic literature, coming through Mahabharata, Arthashastra, Manusmriti. You know, we are talking of the centuries BCE, not to mention texts after the Christian millennium. So there is a lot of confusion here, historical confusion in the three lines that I read out. He's also confusing nation and nation state happily, you know, and we will see how that is a problem. You need to have clarity and precision of understanding before you can even begin to question anything about history. A lot of confusion here. We'll try and see what we can do about that. Clearly, what is in operation here is a teleology. That is, the presupposition that the modern period is more influential in shaping a people than the ancient could ever be. Even for such an ancient, continuous living civilization like India, we still think that the ancient or the medieval, the pre-modern generally, is forgotten and gone. And it is the modern and the colonial period that has actually done everything that is of any importance today. These positions also show the persistent hold of colonial and Western thought on India studies. Because so deep is the dependence on European models of historical development and vocabulary, even the vocabulary, nation, nation state, the definitions arising from phenomena in Europe, you know, from the 18th and 19th centuries. Everything so rooted there, and yet it is helicopter dropped on India and on India's past. And Indian text, traditions and history are expected to somehow catch up and meet those parameters, or bye-bye. You don't exist, you don't have a history, you don't have you don't have rationality, you don't have democracy, you don't have science, you don't have anything, if you're not fulfilling the criteria set by a very colonial space and time, which was Western Europe in the 19th century. So deep is the dependence on European models of historical development and vocabulary, such as, what am I talking about? The German and Italian unification and the French Revolution, that the fundamental difference between a nation and a nation state is lost sight of in these statements. Now, what is a nation state? Let's be very clear. So when they are denying the idea of an India in the past, they are denying that she existed as a nation state. That is one thing to say. But is that the same as denying that she existed as a nation? The two are very different. What is the difference? Unlike a nation state, which is a formal and political arrangement, a nation is first and foremost a notion. The jointly held sense of belonging to a common territorial and cultural entity that a people name and assert. A community of emotion, of belief, and of praxis. A felt community, as Rajat Kanta Ray called it, a felt community. And Bernard Cohn, if you've heard of him, the famous anthropologist, he also spoke of something called subjective regions. India, according to me, is a classic subjective region because she exists in our beliefs as much as she does on the ground. There's no denying that. Why run away from that? Why not embrace that? Let's see, why not? Now, so if this is what a nation is, a sense of a felt community and that a people name and assert, a territorial but also a conceptual and cultural unity and entity, then what is our evidence? From 2000 years, 2500 years, are we getting evidence of such a notion? We are. And anyone who has even a working acquaintance with the master texts of Indic civilization, like for example the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Mahapurans, and I'll name a lot more texts. I've written a lot about this incidentally. If any of you are interested, for the thoroughly referenced data on this, there is a lot of material out there. I'm happy to share that with you after the talk. Now, these texts, which are conservatively dated at least 5th century BCE onwards, conservatively, yields the presence of a notion of a felt community and a common bounded entity which is affirmed and named and charted with great precision. So again, this is not just some rumor in pre-modern times that a small bunch of elites were somehow subscribing to. They have a very clear notion of what they're talking about when they talk of India. What is this? Let me give you a few examples. Mahabharata would be the best. The Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata, its 10th chapter, and you can go and look this up, details in more than 70 verses. First, the historical geography of the entity that it calls Bharatvarsha. And it says Bharatvarsha runs from the Himalayas in the north to the sea in the south. And that is a running refrain. You're going to hear 2000 years of text on India describing India like that. So clarity on that macro front certainly, but look at the micro clarity as well that prevails. So first, the Mahabharata tells you about the historical geography of Bharatvarsha. So it's actually helping you map what is this notion that it's talking about. All the many mountain ranges and rivers of this land running from north to south and from the northeast to the west and then going south again. And then it documents the ethnography of the land. That is, the variegated communities, janas, and their little formations, janapadas, that peopled or populated Bharatvarsha. Significantly, for a text that is ironically called a mythological text, the Mahabharata, these janas that the Mahabharata is enumerating are all historically attested people. Nothing mythic about this text or about what it is saying about India. Who are these janas that constitute Bharatvarsha 2500 years ago in the Mahabharata? Everything from the people of Kashmir, explicitly named Kashmiraha, the people of Kashmir, Gandhar is modern Peshawar in Pakistan today, Cambodge in modern Afghanistan, and Punjab in the north, to Vidarbha and Malava in central India, from Kashi, Magad, Odisha and Bengal and Assam in the east, to Dravida, Kerala, Karnataka, Kuntala is roughly Telangana, and Chola in the south. And there are a lot more. I obviously can't read off 70 verses here in a talk. 2500 years ago. Named as such. I'm not making these names up. Those named as belonging to Bharatvarsha also included Mlecchas and Yavanas on the one hand, very broadly meaning outsiders, especially on the western boundary, and the tribes, what we call tribes today, that is the Nishadas, Shabaras, Kiratas and Abhiras and so on. There's also an explicit reference to all four Varnas inhabiting Bharatvarsha. So what are we getting? A thoroughly inclusive and precise understanding of what Bharatvarsha is, down to its very people and not excluding anybody. Right? In this way, in the Indian epic's testimony, no conflict is seen between the unity and identity of India and its inherent diversity. That is the point. Instead, you see a frank acknowledgement of both Bharatvarsha's geographic and ethnic complexity, and at the same time, this is not any exclusionary vision of the land, as I said. Most modern scholarship has missed this capaciousness and pluralism within ancient ideas of India. So if you're looking for a hegemonic, monolithic notion of what India was in the past, you will not find it. And that's a good thing, isn't it? But that doesn't mean we dismiss that there was an idea of India. There was in fact a fairly evolved, multicultural, word we use in today's times, but here you have it. So many centuries, millennia ago. So this is something important to note. Bharatvarsha emerges here in one of its earliest articulations as a singularity that subsumed rather than erased the many. Why I have said that with emphasis is because we are going to connect it with Shankara in a little time from now. Singularity that subsumes, that does not erase the many. Okay? We'll come back to this. Very quickly, I have to give you more evidence. I'm a historian, I don't make claims without that. In the 4th century BCE, just a little after the Mahabharata perhaps, the Greek ambassador to India, Megasthenes. So if Indic testimonies are not good enough, here we have foreign testimonies, and what are they saying? In his book Indica, he also named the land of the people of Indoi as bounded by the sea to the east, west and south, and by Mount Hemados, that is abode of snow, to the north. He clearly says it is separate from Central Asia, from Scythia. Would you like to get some water? Sure. And that in the north it is separated from Scythia, that is Central Asia, and it is bounded by the Indus to the west. Okay, so very specific geographical markers. After him, Ptolemy, by the way, he also says that, very interesting and provocative in today's times, Megasthenes also says that great diversity of people in India, but they all belong to the land, not one race here is from outside. Interesting little input in modern debates, as I said. After him, Ptolemy, the 2nd century geographer from Egypt, he claimed in similar fashion that India was bounded by the ocean in the south and the snowy mountains in the north. What does he tell you about the western and eastern boundaries, however? Very interesting, 2nd century. He says Hindu Kush on the west. So he's not saying just the Indus, he's saying the Hindu Kush mountain range on the western borders. And in the east, he speaks of an India that goes east of even the mouth of the Ganga river. Where is the mouth of the Ganga river? Anyone? Hello? Mouth. No, the mouth is where the river meets the sea. Yeah? So Bangladesh, we are talking about the Sundarban, the delta, right? So Bangladesh, but he's talking of an India that is to the east of the mouth of the Ganga up till China. To my mind, that is nothing but the northeast of India. What lies between Bangladesh and China? Right? So he is even naming that, very intriguing, as India, 2000 years ago. Now, at about the same time, in the far south, you have Tamil Sangam texts like the Pattirapattu, which is, as I said, roughly contemporary to Ptolemy, and the later epic, the Shilapadikaram, in the 5th century CE. What are they saying? They are invoking the same geographic imagery of the space between the snowy Himalayas and Cape Kumari, Kanyakumari. They call it Cape Kumari in the oceanic south. So explicit, again, cognizance of that same land as some kind of entity. Now in the 5th century CE, the Vishnu Mahapuran, of course very well known evidence, it maps India's not just geographic but also ethnic and cultural boundaries in this verse. In fact it's a set of verses, but I'm quoting only two here. Uttaram yat samudrasya himadreschaiv dakshinam varsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santatihi. Bharati, 5th century CE. We have a name for us. Yojana nam navasahasram tu dvipo ayam dakshina uttarat purve kirata yasyante paschime yavanaha sthitaha. Let me translate that for you. The country north of the sea and south of the Himalayas is Bharat and her children are Bharati. 20th century, anyone? Here is nomenclature from 2000 years ago. And he says it is 9,000 yojanas from north to south. It has Kiratas in the east and Yavanas in the west. Now Kiratas are whom? Scholars believe they refer to the denizens of Assam and the eastern Himalayas. And the Yavanas are whom? At that point of time, they are referring to those settled in the greater Punjab, possibly the Indo-Greeks. So, Assam to Punjab, greater Punjab, which means inclusive of Pakistan, and from the north to the south. This is the Vishnu Mahapuran telling you. On view then is an explicit and inclusive self-understanding of the land. Inclusive and explicit. There is no epistemic confusion there. Is there a Bharat? What is Bharat? Maybe it extends only a few miles. And recurrent testimonies. What more do you want? There's a lot more. If this is convincing enough, there's a lot more evidence of this. The same inclusivity, explicitness, etc. you find in the 6th century Brihat Samhita of Varahamihir. Now this text again exhaustively enumerates the many regions and peoples that were part of India, displaying yet again clarity and detail of this idea of India as a unity through her plurality. That's the constant theme. There is a unity through her plurality. No one is denying either of these phenomena in ancient times. This would again resonate with Xuanzang, that is the Chinese Buddhist pilgrim's testimony in the 7th century. Now Xuanzang came to India and he traveled through large parts of it, and he has left behind his accounts called the Siyu Ki. Here Zhang says, when he was about to enter what he thought was India, he says he is standing at ancient Nagarahara. Nagarahara is modern Jalalabad in Afghanistan. This is west of the Khyber Pass. Khyber Pass is in the Hindu Kush mountain range. Okay, are we clear about what part of the geography we are talking of? So when Xuanzang is coming to India, he says, I am standing at Nagarahara, which is a spot just west of the Khyber Pass. So he hasn't crossed the Hindu Kush yet, but what does he say? He says, I am standing at the gateway to a country called Indu. So for him again, like for Ptolemy, it is the Hindu Kush that is the boundary of Indu. That is India. Alright? He again describes Indu in classical terms as bounded by the snowy mountains in the north and the sea on three sides, extending to an area of 90,000 li, li being the Chinese mile, so a very vast country. He is not talking of only the Indus region, let's be clear. A lot of scholars have suggested, he's talking Indu means, Indus means just the northwest. No. 90,000 li is the extent, and he says it is inhabited by 70 different kingdoms. That was his enumeration. So again, same thing, plurality, unity. 7th century, Xuanzang. I am not going to give you the rest of the evidence, but I have detailed it right down to the 18th century through all manner of sources: Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Buddhist, Sanskrit, Prakrit, epigraphic, Indo-Persian literature. Very clear notion of what India is. Hind is, Hindustan, different names, but the notion of what it is exactly the same, which is incredible. But let me pause with the evidence at 7th century, because what all of this suggests is that well before the time of Shankaracharya, there was in place a clear notion of India as a conceptual and a lived place. Moreover, the modern view that this land was too vast and diverse to ever have been one country ignores the fact that the ancient Indian concept of nation or country could well recognize and embrace that vastness and diversity, and acknowledge alongside a common unified sphere of cultural circulation. That is a phrase I have coined. A common unified sphere of cultural circulation. The understanding of India as both many and one. I'm underlining that because again I'm going to connect that with Shankara. It should come as no surprise then that the clear geographic and circulatory horizons would inform the itinerary of any pre-modern traveler like Shankara, seeking to circumambulate this robust cultural sphere. Indeed, through their movements, such travelers like Shankara and so many other pilgrims would have simultaneously enacted this sphere and its routes and pathways. So there are two kinds of processes going on here. One is they have a very clear notion already of the area that they are going to traverse. But by traversing it, they are reasserting that area. So they're bringing it into existence by their steps. That's why I said India is also a land of praxis. This is not just theory. This is practice over the millennia. It is in the context of this common episteme that I've been showing you that historical sources are denoting that we will now discuss Shankaracharya's teachings and his voyages. There is intense scholastic debate, as I mentioned, over the dates of Shankara. People have suggested as early as 509 BCE to, like I said, 839 CE. And there is controversy about every aspect of his life history as well, and over which compositions of his are authentic and which can be attributed to others, passing it off in the name of Shankara. So who was the historical Shankara versus who are mere duplicates? This is, in a nutshell, the kind of historical obsession over Shankara, a historiographical obsession. Now, the scope for this confusion is partly on account of the sheer prolixity, the sheer numbers of literary traditions that have grown around Shankara over the centuries, and the fact that there are not one but at least 4 different mathas or monastic orders of his followers that are named after him. Alright? So this has aided this kind of confusion that was there really one Shankara, or these just different people who have taken his name. However, as scholar Jacqueline Southern Hurst observes, personal identity was not significant in the Advaitin tradition, and the quest for a historical Shankara is perhaps only an Occidental, Western obsession with personality and the individual. Maybe Indians are interested in something else and something much more than these kind of specificities. In any case, while there is no denying the fact that there have been several other saints also who have taken his title later, the figure of Adi Shankaracharya's prominence and influence, such a figure in history of this kind of enormity, can perhaps, I suggest, be understood not merely as an individual, but one who had attained the stature of a motif or a symbol in Indian history. What did he stand for? What does he symbolize? I will be suggesting one such thing today. Most accept the bare minimum facts about Shankara, that he was born in Kaladi, Kerala, circa 700 CE, and attained Siddhi or passed in Kedar in Uttarakhand. That tends to be the dominant story about him. He took sannyas renunciation at a tender age and mastered the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutras, on all of which he wrote defining commentaries or bhashyas. In the process, through rigorous argumentation and refutation of opposing philosophies, Shankara argued for the supremacy of Vedanta, the monist metaphysical thought found in the texts that I just named. At the heart of Vedanta, according to Shankara, was the principle of Advaita, right? Unified consciousness, one without a second. So, Advaita. It is this idea of a self-reflexive consciousness called Brahman, which is none but the Atman, which is beyond multiplicity, so Advaita, and also beyond attributes, so Nirguna. Now, again, in her significant study, this is putting in a nutshell, right? Advaita Vedanta is such an enormous corpus of thought that it's possibly impossible to reduce it to 2 lines, but I'm just saying this to give you an outline. Now, in her significant study, Sadran Hurst, the scholar I spoke about, emphasizes Shankara. She says he was not just a great philosopher, he was also a great teacher. A teacher par excellence, Acharya, Jagat Guru. Why is he called Jagat Guru? Right? For that reason. She says that among his teaching methods were techniques such as questioning, renunciation, negation, and interiorization. Methods that imitated the pedagogical techniques found in the Upanishads themselves. So Shrutivat, he's actually using the methods that are in the Upanishads to teach the Upanishads. But this is the main point that I'm getting to. In keeping with the experiential nature of true jnana, so the consciousness I just spoke about, pure consciousness, Brahman, this is true jnana, but its nature is experiential. Its nature is not cognitive. So if I try and explain to you and draw charts and tables to tell you, this is Brahman, you will never get it. You will get it only and only when you experience it. And there are methods by which you experience true consciousness, right? So this realization, the experiential nature of true jnana, this, in keeping with this nature of what he was teaching, the unique advantage of these methods was to aid the students' realization rather than cognition of this ultimate reality. This pedagogy aimed at experience, anubhava, of this reality, anubhava of true knowledge, rather than mere explication. Since the nature of that knowledge transcended words and description. What am I talking about here? Essentially, this knowledge of ultimate reality is knowledge from which words turned back. This is the Taittiriya Upanishad describes this knowledge of Brahman as knowledge from which, so it says, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha. That from which words turn back. Why is this so? Because it is transcendent reality. How can you capture something that transcends with means that are limited? You just can't do that. And this nature of transcendent reality was beyond perception. It is beyond cognition. You can't get it with your 5 senses. That's not the point of this kind of realization. Hence it is para, transcendent, and aprameya. Aprameya, that is without proof. You cannot have proof for everything. That's why I said subjective. So beyond proof of perception. Thus, what am I trying to explain? That Shankara's pedagogy was simultaneously praxis. His teaching was also practice. It is like laboratory work being the theory also. You can't do Advaita without doing the practice of it. The lab work, as it were. Okay? Now, who did Shankara's pedagogy and praxis? Who was it for? Who was he teaching this knowledge of, this realization of unitary consciousness for? Have I been able to establish at least a couple of things so far? One, that the idea of India in pre-modern times was one that was unified and yet diverse, or diverse and yet unified. And two, we are talking of Shankara's philosophy, his specific propagation of Advait Vedant as something that was experiential, something you had to realize. And what are you realizing? A truth, a knowledge that is also unitary, that is also unified. Monist consciousness, monist metaphysics, that is what Brahma Jnana is. Okay, so there are these 2 points. Just bear with me, just hold these 2 points in your mind so far, and I will bring them together in hopefully a convincing fashion in just a little while more. So I asked that this is his pedagogy and this is his praxis. Who is it for? Who is he teaching it to? Now, thanks to the cosmopolitan and universal thought world of the Sanskrit language, the area of its knowledge systems and debates was not confined to the region of their origins, but could actually spread and circulate across a very vast geography. I'm sure you've heard of that, right? At least from Central Asia to Southeast Asia, with the whole of South Asia or India as its fulcrum. And I'm saying at least, because actually Indic texts have traveled far wider to other corners of the globe. The extent of Shankara's trans-sectarian scholarship certainly corroborates the supra-regional character of Sanskrit learning, as it was not confined to Kerala or even South India. It could have been, but it wasn't. At the same time, it displays a special order of territorial awareness that related to the idea of India. So Sanskrit spread across a lot of area, but Shankara's notion, territorial concepts, is more special than that. What is it? This territorial awareness was laid out by Shankara with what appears to have been considerable self-consciousness via his Digvijaya. Digvijaya, triumphant tours of the land, wherein we are told he and his disciples travelled from one centre of learning to another, debating intensely the local scholarship, defeating it, and proceeding to assert the supremacy of Advait. Now this concept of Digvijaya, I'll just take a minute over this, because it has an ancient and very interesting lineage. Originally it signified a political military conquest by a great warrior or hero, the Vijigishu. It's mentioned in the Mahabharata, the Arthashastra. Through his victory of all quarters, the Vijigishu became the Chakravarti. The Chakravarti literally means one whose chariot wheels, Chakra, roamed far. Okay? So the supreme ruler. Significantly, this aspirational realm of conquest and rule, the Chakravarti Kshetra, you find as Bharatvarsha in the Mahabharata, as well as in historical inscriptions such as Hathigumpha inscription of Kharavel at Kalinga, Samudragupta's Allahabad Prashasti, inscriptions of Devapala in Bengal and Bihar, and also in parts of southern India. Again, I've written this in great detail elsewhere. I won't go into that here. But what I'm saying is it's not a coincidence that Chakravarti Kshetra, even in a military context, was Bharatvarsha from very early. The Buddha then casts the Chakravarti as the Chakravarti Dhammiko Dhammaraja. That is, the righteous king who ruled and conquered not by force but by piety, Dhammena. Now Shankara's Digvijaya would seem to invoke this parallel between temporal and spiritual supremacy that is contained in the idea of a ruler renunciate. So Shankara as a ruler renunciate who harmonizes the four quarters, all the dikas. Shankara's was a purported conquest by righteous intellect, meant to establish the ascendance of Advaita, which was also about replacing false consciousness of the many with real knowledge of the one. Okay, so this is interesting. I just told you that what does he do on his Digvijaya? He goes around defeating local schools of thought which are sectarian and establishing supremacy of Advait, which is trans-sectarian, which doesn't believe in dualities, doesn't believe in differences, which is what sectarianism is all about. This is about a consciousness that exceeds all of these. And hence the parallel with Chakravarti with the Digvijaya. Now the main source of Shankara's Digvijayas are from a literary tradition that are known as the Shankara Vijayas. You have a large number of these texts. I will be speaking today, I will be drawing on the Shankara Vijaya by Madhavacharya Vidyaranya. This is his 13th century hagiography of Shankaracharya. Now, Swami Tapasyanand, who has translated this text, he perceptively writes something interesting. He says that all the Shankara Vijayas mix the natural with the supernatural. Okay, he's admitting it. But impressive individuals and events in history easily took a mythological turn. And that far from this detracting from their historicity, it marks the measure of the impact these made on the generations that followed. Unquote. Why did I say this? Why did I quote this? Because it harks back to what I began with. That there's, this concern, this anxiety in scholarship. That was he real? Was he mythical? Did the Digvijayas happen? Did they not happen? Perhaps all this is completely besides the point. Perhaps the point is something else. And that is the point of these notions of his Digvijaya is what the traditions have saved for you. So get the point rather than losing yourself in the woods. That is what I propose. So I'm quoting from Madhavacharya Vidyaranya's 13th century Shankara Digvijaya. Now, who was this Madhava? He went on to become the head pontiff, that is, he took on the name of Shankaracharya at Sringeri. Right? Is the AC off? It's suddenly gotten really warm. Madhavacharya's Shankara Digvijaya is the most authoritative of his Digvijayas, and that is why I'm quoting from him. Now he describes for you Shankara's Digvijaya, the itinerary of his Digvijaya. Just listen to it, right? If for no other reason than the fact that it is from 800 years ago. But look at its referentiality. Look at how you can relate to his itinerary. Shankara, together with his disciples and King Sudhanva, set out from Kaladi, Kerala. So he starts from the far corner, far south of the country, and traversed first to Rameshwaram, then Kanchi, then Andhra, Vidarbha and Karnataka. These are named as such. These are not names I am giving. I am quoting from the text. Defeating in particular Tantric Shaivas like the Bhairavas and Kapalikas. Thereafter he reached the shores of the Western Sea and then Gokarna, Maharashtra, Saurashtra, Dwaraka, Gujarat, defeating along the way Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas and Sauras. This is why I am saying his philosophy is trans-sectarian. He is then said to have moved onwards to Ujjaini, Madhya Pradesh, Bahalika, Bactria, Greater Punjab, Shurasen, Mathura, Daradas, Gilgit, Baltistan, and Kuru and Panchal, Punjab and Haryana. Following that, he is described as taking his exegetical endeavors to Kamarupa, Assam, Koshala, Uttar Pradesh, Anga, Vanga, and Gauda. These are Bengal. These are all Bengal, different parts of Bengal. Defeating Shaktas, Pashupatas, Baudha and Kshapanakas, Jainas along the way. This phase of his Digvijaya is probably when he had that famous debate with Mandana Mishra, right? And his the Purva Mimamsaka ritualist and his scholar wife Abhaya Bharati at Mahishi, which is possibly in Bihar. Now, we are told he also went to Badrinath and to Kedarnath later. This is all in the text, 13th century. Let me quote. The doctrine of Brahma Vidya that Shankara preached, which confers liberation through the elimination of duality, reigns victorious over the country. Not one region or another. It's a very explicit and self-conscious claim to a trans-regional area over which Advaita rules. From Rameshwaram in the south, where Rama built his bridge dividing the seas, to the northern boundaries marked by the Himalaya mountains. And from the eastern mountains where the sun rises, Arunachala, from the eastern mountains to those of the west where it sets, unquote. Any doubts about his itinerary? Any doubts about the conception in the 13th century text, talking about an 8th century event, about the totality and inclusivity of the region that Shankara is traversing? More importantly, the culmination of these travels, as it were, was all the way, where do you think it was? He's gone all over. Where do you think it culminates? Kashmir. Starts at the very southern point of the nation, culminates in the very northern point of the nation, Sharda Peeth in particular. So that's not just in Kashmir, it is in northern Kashmir. Currently, unfortunately, in Pak-occupied Kashmir, just across the line of control and in ruins. But once upon a time, the Sharda Peeth was actually among the top 3 preeminent tirthas of entire Al-Hind. Why am I saying Al-Hind? Because this is Al-Biruni's testimony. He calls India Al-Hind and he names the Sharda Peeth along with Thaneshwara and Somnath as the top 3 pilgrimage centers of the entire Al-Hind. We also know from the Raj Tarangani, the history of Kashmir in the 12th century, that as early as 8th century, you have pilgrims and devotees from as far as Bengal coming all the way to Sharda Peeth for pilgrimage and for also studies and education. There's a lot more about that in my Kashmir book. No coincidence then that Shankara is actually culminating there. Now, the ultimate victory of Shankara's intellect is symbolized in his ascension of the throne of omniscience, Sarvagya Peetha, that is at Sharda Peeth, on the banks of the Kishinganga river. The text narrates, how did this happen? The text narrates that while Shankara was on the banks of the Ganga, one day on his Digvijaya, he was exhorted, a voice comes and he is exhorted by the voice saying the following. In the world, Jambudvipa is the most famous region. In that region, Bharata excels all others. Are you seeing the conceptual geography? This is not some blind notion of a Bharata. It's being located in a larger area and then you're zooming in. So, Jambudvipa in the world is the most famous region, possibly South Asia. In that region, Bharata excels all others. In Bharata, Kashmir is the most famous place. Here is the 13th century southern Indian text, the abbot of Sringeri, saying Kashmir is the most famous place in Bharatvarsha. I think I'm going to wait till... This is too important to be distracted. Bhaiya, ho gaya. Ho gaya. Thank you. So I'm quoting, in Bharata, Kashmir is the most famous place, for there it is said Mother Sharada is present. Who is Sharada? Saraswati, Shakti as Saraswati. In that region there is a temple with 4 gates dedicated to Sharada. This I'm quoting. Within is the Sarvagya Peetha. Scholars from east, west and north Bharata who could prove their scholarship have in the past opened the 3 gates pertaining to their respective directions. It is said that till now there has been no learned man from the south who could open the southern gate, unquote. So when he hears this voice, Shankara decides he has to go there. And of course, very successfully he passes the test set by none other than Saraswati herself. She appears, gives him 3 questions, really tough ones, and he of course clears it. And he ascends the Sarvagya Peetha. The point I want to make, whether this is a mythological story or not, what are the points of historico-geographical interest emerging from this? See how the symbolic unity of Bharatvarsha's directions as coming together in Kashmir is self-consciously stated here. In fact, I have a whole book on this, as Vinayji was mentioning. Please read it. Please, I've written extensively in the press as well on Kashmir's forgotten history, of a deeply connected history with far corners of India. This is just more proof of the same. So hearing this, Shankara goes there and he ascends the Sarvagya Peetha. Commemorating this association with Kashmir appears to be the 8th century Shankaracarya temple. Have any of you heard of that even? Or been there? Well, you should. Your forefathers were doing it, you see. The Shankaracarya temple is located in Srinagar, on a hill on the very periphery of Srinagar. And why is it called the Shankaracharya temple? Because it is associated with him. He is believed to have founded this temple there, and he founded it on the site of a much older temple, at least 2nd century BCE temple called Jeshteshwara, founded by the son of Mauryan Emperor Ashoka. And the Raj Tarangani tells us this. So look at the self-consciousness of history that pervades among our predecessors. He very self-consciously makes this mutter in, and it's still there. It's an incredible temple. Please do go and look at it. It's a Shaiva temple. The point being that Shankara's connection with Kashmir and his strong local memory there indicate the remarkable centrality of the far north of India to the imagination of the far south, and vice versa. Are you following me? Not a joke. He could happily have settled for a Rameshwaram, a Kanchi, so many holy places in peninsular India. He chooses to go right to the other corner. If this is not a self-conscious statement of cognition of that unified sphere of cultural circulation that I talked about a little while ago, what is it? How can you dismiss this kind of pre-modern narrative, pre-modern testimony on what I started by calling our collective self-definition? We also know Kashmir apart, this Digvijay apart, we also know from his these hagiographies that he also founded 4 mathas in the 4 extremities of Bharatvarsha. Again, no coincidence. The Chatur Amanaya Peethas, where are they located? Anyone? Yes? Yes? Yeah. And we need a 4th? Yes. So we have the Peethas at Badrinath in the north, Puri in the east, Sringeri in the south, and Dwaraka in the west. And these are all also associated with the Dashanami Sampradaya, the Advaitic Dashanami Sampradaya, which continues into the present. I think I don't need to point out the obvious, right? The self-consciousness behind the cardinal location of these 4 matters. Are you telling me it's a coincidence? Are you telling me it is meaningless? Or are you telling me it is fictitious? They just happen to be existing for the last 1500 years. No, right? You can't dismiss the people's history. And this is all evidence of that. Now, clearly this is correlating to the idea of India mapped by the predecessors of Shankara as well that I was talking about. Right? No difference between the notion. So Shankara as a legatee too, as an inheritor too, and a great propagator of this notion of India. The very same notion. Now, this is not entirely new what I am saying, because some scholars have made this observation about the 4 Peethas, the 4 mathas, right? Including our philosopher president Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. Now, he so much as suggested that Shankara was being, quote, a shrewd political genius and patriot when he was in his choice of location of these mathas. And he says that there have been few minds more universal than Shankara's, unquote. Now, I am definitely in agreement with the universality of Shankara's thought, but I believe this entire discussion, when you see it together, it suggests that his journey, his peregrinations were not exactly patriotism. I wouldn't say that as a historian, nor were they only polemics. I argue that they were pedagogy. So here is where I begin to tie all my threads together. We talked a lot about Shankara's pedagogy just a little while ago, and how it's realization based, it's experiential, it is praxis based, it is not just cognitive, it is realization. And realization of what? Of a unity that subsumes and does not erase. Right? Now let's just bring this all together. True to his experiential method of teaching that we discussed earlier, I believe that Shankara's Digvijaya simultaneously effected and demonstrated a sphere peopled by great diversity of thought and practice like India, but unified by trans-sectarian Advaita, which pierced through the illusion of multiplicity. Illusion here, mithya or maya. These are terms from the Advaita discussion, right? So here is the metaphor that I am proposing. India provided a laboratory, as it were, for Shankara. One that in its own diversity and unity mirrored both the bewildering variety of samsara and the ultimate oneness or ekatma of Brahman, respectively. The singularity, whether Brahman or India, that subsumes rather than erases the many, was recognized only through its realization. The practice, hence the Digvijaya. Hence he is taking his disciples all around, actually putting this knowledge into existence. And not merely, I'm about to finish, so if I could have your attention at the back for just a couple of minutes more. Otherwise you miss the point of the whole talk. So this singularity, whether Brahman or India, that subsumes rather than erases the many, was recognized only through its realization. Therefore, the pan-Indic coverage of Adi Shankaracharya's Digvijaya may have been a self-conscious choice for pedagogic effects, a self-conscious metaphor, a heuristic tool par excellence to explain how, despite the multiplicity, there can be a unity. It rendered the metaphysics of Advaita as metaphor, one that invoked the unified sphere of cultural circulation and imagination that was India through all its plurality, and in the process reasserted it. Thank you very much for your attention.
We are running out of time, but if there is one question, if someone feels compelled to ask, maybe we can take one question.
Sure. Any questions?
Maybe one question. So, maybe I have not understood it well. When Shankaracharya is uniting everyone, so is he doing, when he is doing the Sthapana of all the matas, are they all falling under his ideology of Smarta, or do they have their specific existences by themselves?
Okay, that is a good question, but it does exceed the evidence of the text that I am drawing on, right? Because by that time, by the 13th century, you don't really have a discussion of, clearly when they are claiming lineage from Shankara, they are subscribing to his Advaita, right? So that is the overarching philosophy. And we needn't really be concerned about whether they were going in their own directions, because what is the point one is ultimately making? That one can be going in many directions, one will end up in the same place, right? The unity. So I think that is the point that one is trying to make.
We have one more question from our faculty.
Sure.
So maybe that is.
Please.
It's not my question, it is basically a statement. You said that there are 4 places in which he established. But there used to be a learned scholar, Philip Martin, in the East of
Yes.
The key hypothesis is that these 4 locations which we say is basically their provenance and all that. It is largely because of Britishers who say that they are more accustomed to the concept of diocese and all these kinds of things, Israeli things. Whereas there are many more, and because he followed Kanchipuram and all that, I don't want to get into that. Point is that he was trying to say very different. So
actually what I was saying throughout the talk is based always on textual corroboration. So I have textual evidence of what I was saying. So this reference to Shankara founding the Chaturamnaya Pithas, the 4 Pithas, is from a text from the medieval period. called, it is Chidvilasa's Shankara Vijaya. He is explicitly naming Shankara and attributing it. So, even if it was an 8th century Shankara doing it, it is certainly not 18th century Britishers. Yeah? Because we are having a text from much before the British that is making this association with Shankara. And like I mentioned in the talk earlier, you know, is it really important that did Shankara go around cutting the ribbon at these 4 mathas, founding them? Or is it important that his memory is being associated self-consciously as a choice by sects and by groups of followers across this sphere, right? So even if the man doesn't operate or exist as a living human being in the centuries that follow, he continues as a memory and a source of strength, a source of inspiration that is uniting nonetheless. Right?
Words fail to express what some of us are going through as we hear you. So one big round of applause, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience.
If we don't get goosebumps when we read about Shankara, hear Shankara, or if we are not pained to see the ruins of Sharda Peeth, the current way it is, there's something seriously wrong with us. But again, this wrong is superficial. I truly trust what Swami Ranganathananda used to say, that scratch any young man of this country, young man, women included, you find the same Rishi blood flowing in them. So our disconnect might be a temporary one. Therefore, some of you are finding it difficult to understand. But there is something called a Shravana Samskara. Listening to them, I think that will already start sowing in some seeds, which will eventually develop. And none of us can escape this reality. This is our own hard reality. If we are here at Devanhalli today, in the lands of Karnataka, this is because it has a connection to Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya, one of his greatest disciples is Sayana Madhava. Sayana Madhava was responsible for Vijayanagara Empire. It was under the Vijayanagara Empire that Mysore Kingdom came into existence. They were the subordinates of Vijayanagara Empire. So if we are here doing this today, we owe it to Shankara at some point of time. This entire country owes to him. Therefore, we are grateful to such teachers who traversed the entire country and made whom we are today. And therefore, such sessions will offer those seeds which will take us in the direction that this institution is primarily established for. The very preamble of this institution says, the concerns of India and Indian knowledge systems will duly inform all our knowledge endeavors, including teaching, research and practice. And this is the primary purpose that we are. This is our reason for existence. And these sessions like this would serve us to lead us the way in which we need to go to. And therefore, we are very thankful to you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and being here. Our heartfelt gratitude. May this be a beginning of a longer association, longer meaningful association, which we are keen to take it forward. And I'm also thankful to all the faculty members who have assembled here today for giving their time to us, and also all the deans who have sent their students. In fact, some of them had to reschedule their classes and then send the students here. So we are grateful for them.
Thank you so much. I hope it was worth it for you. Thank you.
And all our students here. Of course, it's already their lunchtime, yet they're happy to be here. So grateful for them. And of course, the credit also goes to Professor Naveen Bhattji, who was instrumental in reaching out to ICPR with a proposal and securing the support from them. So on behalf of Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, I extend a warm gratitude to each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you and namaskar.
May I now request Dr. Chaitra, who is the Director of Center for Study of Cultures, to hand her the token of our gratitude. I'll just take a moment. Many times we don't realize the blessings that we already have. What ma'am was referring to as a 2,500 year legacy is something so accessible to us, but yet our eyes sometimes remain shut. I was in Singapore in 2015. That was the year they were celebrating in the month of August SG 50, that 50 years of Singapore's existence. While they were celebrating 50 years of their existence, one of the concerns many of the people in the administration were having was, see, we are a country today, but we don't know how long we'll remain as a country because many people view it as a business or an office. They come here to make money. There is no culture, there is no history that unites us. Therefore, it's something that we'll have to create and curate as we go forward. But here, we are naturally endowed with it. And just this thought, let this sink in, that 2,500, 5,000 years is what you can always draw from. I think this is something, a great blessing that all of us have. Let us cherish and build on this blessing. Thank you.